things. The last job I had where I served the longest was really kind of charged with adult discipleship and evangelism. Um, and I did a little bit of everything. Um, but I mean, I had some particular responsibilities. Some of it had to do with our newcomers coming to the church. It was a large church, 3,600 people. I mean, on an annual basis, we probably had 50, 75 new people, adults joining the church. So working with them, um, but also trying to do like creative programming to attract those people to our church. I think with kind of the thinking, I realized in retrospect myself and what I see a lot of people do is we think that if we can just get people in the environment, into the building, into the events, into the Sunday programming, then the like magic will happen and the person's life will be changed. So for a long time, that was, a lot of my efforts trying to do creative things to get people around, coming to the events and, good speakers and things like that, hoping that lives would transform. Um, but yeah, along the way, I just started getting frustrated with that. This isn't working. I'm exerting a lot of effort. Am I going about it the wrong way? Do I need to continue doing that? I'm just not doing it right, or is it something else entirely? So I was at that church for 6.5 years, but I'd have to say probably about 5.5 of those years I really was wrestling with what's the best thing to do? How can I make disciples? And so I really was learning for a lot of that time, availing myself to learning new things and trying it out and sometimes making mistakes along the way. About a year into my time at my last church, that helped me reevaluate the way I was going about ministry. And the first thing really, at the time I thought it was the worst thing that could possibly happen to me, but turned out to be a real blessing. And that's that I was really struggling with anxiety and I had a panic attack in the pulpit while I was preaching. Almost blacked out. Thankfully I didn't. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that I wasn't feeling right. And I told the people this and I went and sat down. And it wasn't until working with a counselor, because I was stressed about what is happening to me. I went to see this counselor and talking things through, he said, you have anxiety. And what happened is you had a panic attack. And he said, and I think it's your work that's doing it to you. Not that like the people in the church were doing this to me as much as the ways that have been ingrained in me to behave. And I think what our church systems tend to expect of pastors was really creating a ton of pressure on me. As a pastor, you have so much responsibility throughout the week, and then on Sunday, there's a lot of energy focused on you and your performance. And that was just, I think, crushing me. And I just thought, why is this happening? Why am I the center of attention? Whatever happened to Ephesians 4? Equipping the saints for the work of ministry. And I just started untangling a lot of things and delegating tasks and empowering more and more people so there wouldn't be all this expectation on me. But that still wasn't quite enough. About 6 months later, I met an older man who's from Australia, who was visiting, and he's a lifelong pastor, kind of successful career. And I was on a walk with him and talking with him about what I do. And he said, I think you're wasting your time. And he said, I think you just need to read the Bible with people and pray with them and just help them to read the Bible and pray. And I was like, it can't be that simple. But he was right. It took me a little bit after that to kind of realize that he was right. And that was related, the panic attack and him saying that was like all this kind of bookends of this season of me just sort of realizing I need to do something entirely different. I need to empower people. I need to equip the saints for the work of ministry. That's my role. My role isn't to do the work for them. And so I've been on a kind of journey since then of trying to figure out how to do that. What's the best way to do that? And and in that and empowering people, how can we actually see like a lot of people saved, like people coming out of darkness into the light, empowering people to reach their own friends and family. So it all goes back to a panic attack. Yeah, so what I did to find answers is what I normally did, go online, do searches, look for books, read books. And I was reading some of the best titles out there in the kind of evangelical and reformed world that had things to do with disciple making, discipleship, and even got some really solid coaching from some guys that I'm still in touch with and friends with. And some things improved, slightly, but it wasn't the major shift that I was hoping for. And so about a year or two into this journey of rethinking things and exploring, I had this random thought. I don't even know where it came from. I thought, what do missionaries actually do? What do missionaries overseas actually do on the ground? I mean, I know they exist. I've met some of them. I know that they work over there, but I couldn't quite tell you what they actually do. And I was curious about that, I think, because, they're seeing people come from some of the most difficult environments, come out of darkness to saving faith, and not alone, but often full movements of people in parts of the Middle East and Asia and whatnot. And so I thought, what are they tapping into that I'm not? And is it possible that we could learn from them and apply that here in North America? And so I just started asking different missionaries that I know, what do you do? What do you actually do? And missions organizations. And I mean, funny enough, I didn't get clear answers right away. And I don't know if I just didn't have the ears to hear at the time, or they were kind of cloaking things and not entirely telling me. But I finally got clarity. This was an act of God. I was at a used bookstore in the Christian book section. And I don't know if you spent any time in a used bookstore in the Christian book section, but there's usually a bunch of nonsense there. But I thought, there might be a gem. And sure enough, there was a book there that was called Church Planting Movements. And I thought that probably meant more like church planting in terms of what we typically think of. And I just was interested, so I picked that up, kind of thumbed through it. It was pretty inexpensive, didn't know what it was about, but I bought it. And I went home and started reading it, and I couldn't put it down. That book is describing, this was in the early 2000s, by a man named David Garrison. He was describing things that I did not know existed. I didn't know these things were happening. That there are movements of millions of people within the last 3 decades, okay, like since the 90s, in places like China, Iran, where they're persecuted and people are being martyred and millions of people are coming to faith. And what are they doing? They're just living out what they see in the Bible. They're basically doing church like what we see in the book of Acts. And I thought as I read that, because it's describing things overseas, is anyone doing this in the United States? And if not, God, I want to see this happen. And I avail myself to you. And I will do this. And my life is like completely, I haven't looked back. That was probably, 3 years ago when I read that book. Yeah, it's a kind of complicated journey about how I left pastoral ministry as we understand it in a traditional church setting into like being a movement pioneer here in the United States. Because it actually kind of requires telling 2 stories that collided. I was learning all this stuff that I've described about movements and beginning to try to implement some of the practices I was learning that people are doing in movements in my church. And again, I mean, we were seeing some fruit, and some people were really attracted to it. Some people were, I think, kind of wigged out by what I was doing, and probably thought I was going through a phase. So I'm trying to do that, and I'm beginning to see, for me to live into movement principles and practices, I'm coming up against some boundaries in my church environment because You have to basically release a lot of authority to everyday people to see a movement happen. And in my denomination, there's a lot of boundaries about who can and who cannot do things. Very hierarchical, high church, requiring ordination for a lot of things that I wanted to see lay people empowered to do. So that's happening, but at the same time, I learned some data about the Northeast of the United States, specifically the New England states, being the most post-Christian region of our country. And when I read that data, I thought, who's doing anything about that? And I was kind of shocked by that because I'm from the West Coast, and I thought there'd be more lost people on the West Coast than the Northeast. And as I just thought about, like, well, who's doing anything about that? What would be the best thing to do up there? It would be to see a movement happen. So kind of conveniently, as I was living into movement practices and having this vision for the Northeast, those two worlds collided. I left pastoral ministry and moved to New England to be a missionary. So that's what I'm doing now. We're just, it's very organic work, meet random people and just start working with them and empower them to be the church.